This week, Shamim Naqvi from SafeLiShare is with us to discuss confidential computing. Then Grace Burkhardt from IOXT Alliance joins us to talk about transparency and certification for IoT device security. Finally, in the enterprise security news, some dope funding. It'll make more sense later. Some mysterious funding. Cyber Risk Alliance acquires the No Identity Conference, using AI to detect successful startup exits, Microsoft 365 Copilot, detection engineering stories and thoughts, decision trees, why buy from early stage startups, lots of crazy AI news, cyber buzzword bingo, all that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy Near Miss Day. This is episode 310, recorded on Thursday, March 23rd, 2023. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is the Czar of Zero Trust, the captain of content, Katie Tytler. How you doing, Katie?
Hello. How are you?
I'm good. Haven't had to worry about any near misses lately. This does refer to an asteroid that apparently came close to the Earth in 1989.
Wow. I certainly haven't had to deal with any of those. Thank goodness. That would be detrimental to our broadcast, I think.
Yeah, an impact crater, definitely.
Yeah.
And now we've got we've got a successful test, right? Like flying something into an asteroid on purpose. I forget exactly the purpose of that. I don't know if it was to see if we can redirect the asteroid but good to be able to defend the Earth from large rocks. Yeah. So that's a day, and today is National Near Miss Day. Yeah, they got a day for everything.
Near Miss Day wasn't last week. Get over it day or something equally prophetic.
Yeah, it was or Always Right Day or something like that. Yeah, there's some weird ones out there, which is why we include it. You know,
it's why we do what we do.
It's a lot of fun. Yeah. All right, join us at an upcoming official cybersecurity summit in a city near you. This series of one-day invitation-only executive-level conferences are designed to educate senior cyber professionals on the latest threat landscape. We are pleased to offer our listeners $100 off admission when you use code SECWEEK23 to register. That's SECWEEK23. Visit securityweekly.com/cybersecurity summit to learn more and register today. All right, now for our first interview, we're talking about confidential computing with Shamim Naqvi, CEO of SafeLiShare, joining us today. Welcome, Shamim.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Yeah, nice to have you. I think it's interesting. You've got a interesting background, and I think be a great place to start for folks that weren't around back in the old telecom labs days, what it was like working at a place like Bell Labs.
Yeah, so I ended up at Bell Labs right out of grad school, and Bell Labs used to be the premier research organization probably in the world at that moment. I think it ended up with about 17 Nobel Awards in various technology subjects. And I was speaking to one of the patent attorneys at some point, and he pointed out to me that it was probably impossible to manufacture an IC circuit anywhere in the world without violating one or more Bell Labs patents. So it was at the forefront of research for a number of years. It was a national treasure, in fact. And it's the best job that I ever had.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds amazing. Like I read about the old like Xerox days as well, and it's I wonder, has all that research moved to like the national labs, like Lawrence Livermore, Oak Ridge National Labs, like all those places?
Yeah, well, those labs were always sort of around, but the freedom that Bell Labs gave was unprecedented. I can tell you a personal story that when I started at the labs, I was in the research section, and I spent the first week waiting for somebody to come and tell me what to work on, what my job was, or something, and nobody did. And after a week or so, I got tired of waiting, so I went to my department head and I said, and his name was Rudd. I said, Rudd, what would you like me to work on? And he said, come in. Close the door, which I did. And then he said, don't let anybody ever tell you what to work on. Do what your heart tells you to work on.
Wow.
That's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of unthinkable in those days, in current terms. Nobody in about 15 years of my life in the Bell system ever told me, here is a project, we want you to work on this project.
I can't think of a better background for a technology entrepreneur to have. You know, like if you're going to start what better education, and starting point could you possibly have? Maybe if there's also an MBA program, like you put those two things together, you're unstoppable.
Yeah. The other fascinating thing about Bell Labs used to be is that it was filled with these very famous people whose books and scientific articles and technical writings you would read about in grad school. And so I spent the first few months of my life at Bell Labs going down the hallways and just reading the names of the people. And there was this wonderful tradition that said that you could walk up to anybody's room and ask them for a little bit of time to talk to them. And they were really very generous with their time. So I would go in and I would say, what sort of things are you working on? What's a good problem to work on? And in fact, it turned out that the first few things that I worked on were problems that had been suggested by some of the people working in the labs there. So I had the great pleasure of being and the wonderful opportunity to work with and learn from some of the luminaries in the area.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, is the opportunity to collaborate there, and to pester some of the other folks, ask them what they're working on. And it reminds me a lot about how informally some of the early hacking groups got together, because a lot of it was, like there was no really any motive aside from just exploring technology and figuring out what you could make it do, what you could do with it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I remember that in those days, Bell Labs had a chess playing program called Bell, B-E-L-L-E. And it was being worked on by a researcher called Joe Condon. And I went to Joe Condon. I had gone to school at Northwestern, which also had a chess playing program in those days called Chess 4.6, I think, if I recall correctly. And I said to Joe, I'd like to work with you on this. And he said, what can you do? And I started talking about certain types of algorithms by which you could do very fast look forward, 10-ply search, 15-ply, 20-ply search, so you can look certain number of new moves ahead. Mm-hmm. He said, completely useless. And I said, why? And he said, because the hardware will give you much better speeds. And so forget all these smart algorithms. Just depend on Moore's law and use the basic hardware. And that sort of insight was sort of remarkable insight in those days. And to that early on predict the idea of the Moore's law and getting performance gains through Moore's law.
So this background, this experience, the access to people, the conversations, I'm sure you could tell stories for hours, but also the openness of the culture. How did that shape you early in your career to where you are today? How does that help you be an entrepreneur, be a leader today? And what are the lessons you've learned that you try to pass on regardless of the climate?
One of the lessons is that you start to believe in the ideas that you have. You in the Bell Labs world, you had to sell your idea to other people. So I sit around and I come up with an idea, and I need some people to work with me and join me in that idea. There's no way I can force anybody to work with me. I'm just a single person. So I would have to literally go to other people, sell them on this idea, convince them of this idea, and then we work together on that idea. So to put together a team of 3 or 4 people, it was just like getting the resources and the people to figure out. So you had to really believe in your idea, sell the idea to your colleagues, put together a project team together. And it was like a sort of internal startup, if you want to think in those terms. So do you trust your idea? Do you believe in your idea? How strongly do you believe in your idea? And how much can you convince the world around you that this was a good idea?
In some ways, though, this is a little bit contrarian to how many, many companies work, because they want everybody sort of on the same page, rowing in the right direction, or what have you. It must have been scary as a younger person to come in, but also freeing. So how do you encourage that within the parameters of today's organizations, where it's a lot more goal-driven in terms of let's get the product to market as quickly as possible, let's get our message out to as many prospects as possible?
You don't. That particular Bell Labs model was the result of the way the research labs got funded. The Bell system was for all intents and purposes, was a monopoly, a self-regulated monopoly. And certain percentage of the profits of the Bell system were devoted for research purposes only. In some literal sense, the trucks rolled in at the start of the year with the funds, and you had a lot of liberty on how you did the research. So you find people working on projects that really had almost nothing to do with telecommunications.
Yeah.
Because you didn't have to. There was no forcing function to say that, is there a telecommunication application of your set of ideas? So people were working on satellite technology. People were working on negative feedback principles. People were doing physics research. People were doing, and some of it did get applied, but the primary purpose of all of that research was research, and not the commercialization of the research was a secondary thought. That sort of idea was pretty unique in those days. There weren't that many companies around that would let you do that would give you that sort of freedom. So in fact, there was a smaller group, I should say, doing fundamental research at T.J. Watson at IBM, the fundamental research group, and perhaps there was a smaller group at Xerox, but there weren't that many, and I don't think it's probably viable anymore in the current world.
Did the patent portfolio get monetized in any way, though? Were there fees that you would get from that patent, or that Bell Labs would get? Did that produce revenue?
So at some point, some patent lawyer told me that Bell Labs had upwards of 27,000 patents. And I asked him, if they were monetizing those patents, because he had told me, or he or somebody else had told me about that. Pretty much, there is nothing anybody could do in the world without violating a Bell Labs patent. So I said, no, we don't enforce, but we do. If we get sued, we do bring our patent portfolio to play, but we don't start enforcement proceedings against somebody else. So there was no infringement practiced by the Bell System Labs. This means that there was no monetization of the patents.
Okay. Yeah, and it makes sense with the patents you're talking about. Like, it would have a direct impact on the economy. If for every computer sold, a certain amount of that had to go to Bell Labs. Yeah.
I mean, Bell Labs did a lot of fundamental work for the DoD. It was very active in sonar, a lot of work in the submarine sector, cabling, underwater cabling. So there was a lot of stuff. In fact, if you looked at the center, the main building, it had these gun turrets at the front. So it had a Darth Vader sort of an outlook. Yeah. Still does, matter of fact. And those were put in place just in case that in the Second World War, somebody decided to bomb the place up.
Gotcha. That's an interesting place to come to work every day.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I wasn't around. I'm not that old, but I'm told of sort of wonderful stories about how people used to work in those days. And a lot of the early researchers would take the ferry across the river from different parts in the city, New York City, and drive up to, and then take a taxi or find some other way, local transportation, to come to work at Murray Hill location. So, just in terms of FYI, the fundamental basic discovery of the Big Bang radiation was also done by Bell Labs. Arno Penzias and Bob Wilson got the Nobel Prize in physics, I believe 1987, if I recall correctly, for the discovery of the Big Bang radiation, the 3.7 degree Kelvin radiation.
And I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was one of the seminal discoveries in physics last 30, 40 years. A lot of our astrophysics research is based on that, is based on that discovery.
I'm about 10 minutes away from Oak Ridge, so there's a lot of similar stories that I've heard growing up here in Knoxville, Tennessee, from stuff that was done out in the secret city, out in Oak Ridge.
Yes. So all of that was wonderful.
Yeah. I mean, thanks for that. That was a really interesting perspective. I've read a few books on it, but haven't talked to too many people that got a chance to work in some of those environments. So let's take this up forward. You've had several startups, and your current startup, SafeLiShare, is focused on the challenge of confidential computing. So let's start there. Let's set a foundation and just understand with what confidential computing is. I suspect some people have probably heard of it, but if you could just kind of walk us through the thesis of confidential computing and why you would want that.
So the basic idea is a notion of trust. How can you trust that a computation is secure? And what does secure mean, and what does trust mean? You have some data, you have an application, or you have an algorithm, let's say, for instance, and you want to run that algorithm on that piece of data. Why should you trust the results? You have a machine learning model, and the model predicts that a patient has a certain disease. Why should the patient trust? Maybe somebody has hacked the system. Maybe somebody has inserted some malicious code into the system. So very basic notions that we all sort of assume that something happens, some computation happens, what is the notion of security and trust and data protection, etc.? So these are very old questions, which people have been asking from the very early days of computing. So for example, you may recall that in the one of the central problems very early on in the history of computing was the idea of how do you do floating point arithmetic. And in fact, there were two classes of machines. There were scientific computers, so-called because they did floating point in hardware. And the general purpose computers, which didn't have floating point, they did floating point in software. And a big question was, should you trust the computations being done on computers that didn't have floating point hardware support? And so these kinds of considerations have happened for a long time. The recent trend in hardware manufacturing is to build in a hardware root of trust, which is a set of private keys that are used to attest the computing environment itself, the memory of the computer itself, to ascertain that no malicious actors gain access. In particular, what happens is that you can use this hardware root of trust and certain other capabilities in the that this computer is endowed with at the time of manufacturing to create completely isolated and protected memory spaces or regions of memory where computations can happen in complete isolation and protection, as I said. So no other process, no other entity that has access to that machine, including root passwords, etc., can ever break in to these protected environments, secure protected environments. In certain parts of the technology, these are called secure enclaves. But there are other terms as well. The general field is called trusted execution environments. So,
and we have, if I can just jump in here, we have some of these environments on modern computers, right? So
yeah.
So in TPM, Apple on their phones, they've got Apple has their own secure enclave for like the fingerprint or the face scan that for certain operations, right?
Correct. Yes, your Apple iPhone has a secure enclave on a chip, and that enclave is used to store your biometric information and certain other highly personal information, so that as to protect it from any malicious actors that might get hold of your phone and might try to break into the phone and steal your personal biometric information or something. So these machines are being increasingly manufactured by all the major manufacturers. So Intel is on the second or third generation of these machines, the Xeon server line. Intel has a second line of machines as well coming out in the near future as well. AMD has a class of machines that use a technology that does trusted execution environments called SEV machines, secure encrypted virtualization. IBM has had a series of machines that use these hardware roots of trust. ARM is very busy manufacturing machines like that. So this is a growing trend. And in fact, I predict quite comfortably that almost all manufacturing of CPUs, etc., is going to entail some version of confidential computing. It'll be ubiquitous in the next year or two. So this is a growing trend. And what it'll afford the user community to do is to start to say, yes, this computation happened, but nobody saw my data. The service provider did not see the data. The platform that provides the service doesn't see the data. The cloud provider, if you're using a cloud provider, the cloud service provider did not see my data. In fact, did not even know which application ran and produced the results and computed the data. And the trust equation, the trust relationship is now between the data owner and the hardware itself. the hardware attests itself. That hardware root of trust has the capability to create a certificate from the manufacturers that says, that attests as to the integrity of the hardware itself. So now, in some sense, if you like the notion of zero trust, you have a notion that says that there are no trusted entities in this computation. There's the data owner, and there's the hardware that attests itself. There's no third party in the middle. There is no trusted intermediary that is needed. Nobody sees the data. It's completely private. It's completely confidential. The service provider doesn't see it. The platform provider doesn't see it. SafeLiShare, if you're using the SafeLiShare software, doesn't see the data. The user and the machine have a trust relationship.
Right. And I imagine, there are some implementation challenges there, right? Like in theory, something like this can be fairly impervious, but like I remember one case where they weren't encrypting between the TPM and the CPU. So somebody found out, like with a Dell laptop, they could just take the bottom off and clip some, I forget what the technical term for the little oscilloscope clips are called.
These are called side channel attacks.
Yeah. Yeah. And they were able to just record it straight, between the TPM and what the TPM was talking to. But right. I imagine there are challenges like that in software as well, and networks are involved.
So when I say that it's completely private and confidential, there are no known successful side channel attacks at the moment. But the world being the way it is, somebody will figure out some way of attacking and stealing information. And people are very creative about these things. But the nice thing is that the manufacturers are backing this particular piece of technology. So fixes and patches happen all the time. That's also true for all kinds of other technologies. The notion of encryption. There are well-known attacks against encryption that have been carried out, and there are patches being done, and there's a growing community of people in this field who now start to believe in the viability of encryption standards. So this is nothing new. One of the sort of interesting side channel attacks is that in confidential computing, the machine, as it does some paging, it writes or reads in pages of memory because of performance reasons. The pages that are written out are in fact designed to be encrypted, but under certain catastrophic situations, the machine can be made to think that some disaster is happening, and it turned out that there was a certain set of temperature or fire related convictions in which the machine thought that it should save the data and didn't have the time to, in fact, encrypt the data. So somebody figured out how to cause the machine to think that there was a fire alarm going on by messing around with the temperature sensors. And was able to.
If I can be permitted to make a joke, you could call it a kernel panic.
Yeah, exactly. But then people figured out how to fix that problem. So it takes a number of years of a new technology to harden it. But it's well worth it. As the world of privacy regulations continues to grow, we as a society are supposed to come up with newer ways of protecting people's privacy and protecting their digital online lives. We need technologies like this for the betterment of society as a whole. We certainly don't want to lose our medical information. We don't want to lose our health information to malicious people. We don't want to lose our identities to malicious hackers. And so these kinds of technologies are an absolute must. So it seems to be on the right track.
Yeah, and that's why, a lot of this stuff has to be done in the public eye, like adopting, we're in the midst of adopting post-quantum algorithms right now, and I saw just the other day somebody had an attack against one of these post-quantum algorithms, and it might have been a side channel type attack. We talked about it briefly in the news, but didn't dive too far into it. But yeah, exposure. There has to be a certain amount of exposure for people to have the opportunity to test this stuff and refine it and polish it and find all the issues, right?
Exactly. NIST and other federal authorities are very interested in this topic. Quantum cryptography is a very interesting field of research at the moment. It's a number of years away, but that's my belief. But it certainly is an extremely worthwhile and extremely valuable research effort at the moment. And as we as a whole learn more about quantum cryptography and quantum encryption algorithms, there will be a growing body of knowledge on how to thwart certain style of attacks, etc. So this is all knowledge that the society needs to acquire as a whole, and it's for the betterment of everybody.
So what about key management? Is key management, again, sorry for the pun, but a key issue here with trusted computing and
So one of the benefits of confidential computing is that since there is no trusted intermediary in the middle, who does key management? We know that data is encrypted, but if you're using where is the private keys that are part of this public key infrastructure? And the interesting thing in confidential computing is that you can make the hardware generate the public key pairs. When that happens, the private key is configured and designed to always remain inside the secure enclave. You never need to have the private key outside of the secure enclave. Only the public key comes out of the secure enclave. This means that I can use the public key to encrypt various information, which can only be decrypted inside the secure enclave using a key that is only known to the hardware. So the key management issue is considerably simplified. The keys are either known, the public keys are known to you, the data owner, the private key is only known to the machine, and you can produce an audit and compliance log to say which entity inside the secure enclave was allowed access based on the private key that was made available by the hardware to that particular entity. That's because a lot of encryption is one of the weaknesses of encryption technology is key management. When a particular type of encryption scheme breaks down, it typically breaks down. Most often it breaks down because somebody mishandles the keys. In this particular case, the hardware handles its own key, so it doesn't matter. You, the user, are not burdened with key management responsibilities. In a very literal sense, the hardware hardware owns the keys, hardware uses the keys, but the hardware is incapable of releasing the keys to any external based entity.
Yeah, and so we've been talking, I think, in more kind of abstract terms here, but in terms of what your company is doing, is this, we were just talking about hardware, but I think you're talking about some of the use cases, using this in public clouds, right? So
yes.
So this is your confidential computing product here can be deployed into I don't want to say malicious environments, but environments where you don't necessarily have control at the hardware level, and that's kind of the point, right?
Yes, absolutely. You can all the major public clouds, Google Cloud Platform, Microsoft Azure, AWS, and others have these machines for general use, and you can provision these machines. They're very complicated to use at the moment, and one of the value propositions that SafeLiShare has is that we make it very easy for you to configure and use these machines and the deployment of these machines. But coming back to the point, if you use these machines, as I said, the trust equation now then shifts and becomes trust between you, the data owner, user, and the hardware that you have provisioned to run your computation. The cloud service provider is no longer in this equation. The cloud service provider never sees the keys that you use to control and keep private and keep confidential the data. And the entire integrity of the machine is managed by the machine itself, the hardware root of trust. In some sense, the cloud provider is just a facilitator of the computation.
Right.
So this,
and I'm thinking about use cases here a little bit. I'm considering. I've worked with some companies where clients wanted our product, the product we were selling, to run in certain clouds, and there are certain situations where your requirements force you to maybe run it in Huawei Cloud or Alibaba Cloud, or for somebody outside the U.S. Maybe Azure is the cloud that's less trusted, right? I'm speaking very much from a U.S. political centric point of view here, but it seems like the idea here is, I can meet that requirement and maybe not worry about what's going on behind the scenes in some of these clouds where, maybe I don't fully trust the operators.
Yeah, I mean, you can turn these public clouds into what we can refer to as private clouds. It's your cloud now, and the security is being handled by you, and the underlying machines that self-attest to their integrity. So it is a private version in which you are freed from key management. So there are use cases. There are numerous use cases. If you are handling private confidential data, PII data, personally identifiable information, or patient health information, or financial data, and if you are concerned about compliance with GDPR or the movement of data across legal jurisdictions, or if you're concerned about consumer data or banking data, etc. All of these applications of oversensitive and confidential and private data can make use of confidential computing. We are talking to healthcare companies. We're talking to financial companies. This morning, I spoke to two financial companies that are REITs, real estate investment trusts, just by way of example. And they say we have all kinds of information from our consumers. We do mortgage-backed securities, etc. So we have lots of personal financial information of people, and we need to protect this information. We need to process their applications, but we don't certainly want to expose that information to some malicious external third parties. So all of those applications are extremely pertinent and can benefit from this notion of confidential computing.
And clearly the primary benefit here is protecting the confidentiality and integrity of the data, but also it seems like there's some potential, well, maybe also a primary driver of this. You spoke a little bit to compliance and regulation, data residency, those kinds of things, privacy of data, but also maybe some side benefits here, like with your cybersecurity insurance.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, so as privacy regulations and security regulations, security threats mount, various regulations now require that the corporation goes out and obtains cyber insurance, and you are now making certain representations and to that insurance provider, and you have to have some proof that those representations are valid and that you are doing what you are representing, and which means that you need to have an audit log or a compliance report that is trusted. Now, if I am producing a compliance report or an audit log, and I testify to its truthfulness That doesn't mean anything at all. It just means that I'm saying that I'm asking you to trust me. The beauty of confidential computing is that the hardware assists the service provider in creating a report, which can be verified by third parties. You don't have to trust the service provider's report. You can give the audit report to any regulatory body, and they can use third-party tools to verify the report that it is an immutable, true, honest record of what happened inside the secure enclave, which actors were to whom the data was exposed, which applications ran, what is the fingerprint, if you pardon my use of this non-technical word. It's called a measurement. Applications have a certain program identity as well. Notion, it's a cryptographic notion. So which applications access the data? Which parts of the data were exposed to which application? And so all of that record is generated from inside the secure enclave and can be verified by independent third parties, where you no longer have to stand and say, trust me. You should say, trust the tools that are being provided to you by third parties to verify the authenticity of the log records. So it's a fundamental shift in terms of your risk posture as a company and your compliance with the representations that you make to afford insurance coverage for you and your customers' data.
No, I love that, Shamim, and I can think of so many great opportunities and use cases for this technology. And before we wrap up here, are you going to be at the RSA conference this year?
Yes, we are. We were a little late in doing, so we won't have a booth, but we certainly will be walking the floors and trying to get as much people to chat with us as we can. We might host a little session for some friends, a coffee hour or a cocktail hour or something like that. We're still, our marketing department is working on that aspect of the situation. But yes, we certainly plan to be at RSA.
All right, excellent. Well, for folks listening, if you want to learn more about SafeLiShare, we do have some links in the show notes that you can check out. And Shamim, thank you so much for joining us today and telling old stories and new ones that you're creating right now.
It's a sign of being old that you have stories. Thank you for asking wonderful questions, and very nice to meet you, Adrian.
Likewise. All right, folks, stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to talk IoT security with Grace Burkhardt from IOXT Alliance.